Okay, welcome to this revision video for OCR B GCSE History, Elizabethans 1580-1603. This is a guide on how to answer question number 7. So for question 7, you need to read 2 historical interpretations and you need to explain the following: how far they differ and what might explain the differences. So there's very much 2 parts to this question. So the question we're going to look at today is interpretations B and C both focus on Elizabethan adventurers. How far do they differ and what might explain any differences? So that's the question that we're going to focus on today. So when you're approaching this question in the exam, you need to think really carefully about how you read the interpretations. So a good tip for this is to make sure that you have read the question carefully, decoded the question. It talks in the question about the idea of Elizabethan adventurers and how far do they differ and what might explain any differences. So what you're looking for as you read the interpretation is what is the overall impression that the interpretation gives about the Elizabethan adventurers, and can you highlight any key quotes that support that viewpoint. It's also really important to look at the provenance, which is where the source comes from. So again, highlighting that, thinking about what might be the perspective of the interpretation, what the purpose of the interpretation might be, and also what the audience of the interpretation might be. So let's have a look at interpretation B. It's an adapted extract from an article on the BBC Devon website from 2005. The title is Royal Ceremony for a Raleigh Statue. And then it says a £30,000 statue of Sir Walter Raleigh has been unveiled in a Devon village by the Duke of Kent. The life-size statue in East Budleigh in Devon, where Raleigh was born, marks the end of a 12-year campaign to celebrate the famous explorer. It's sponsored by British American Tobacco in honour of Raleigh, who brought tobacco from America. The explorer was knighted by Queen Elizabeth I in 1587. Local MP Hugo Swire said, "I am delighted that we have a lasting memorial to one of our local heroes." So the key thing to get from this interpretation straight away is that the overall impression is that Elizabethan adventurers were heroic and they deserve to be honoured. It's very positive about the idea of the Elizabethan adventurers. Obviously, this one focuses on Sir Walter Raleigh. Now, if you're going to look at some key quotes to kind of get which really support that view of the interpretation being positive, you can think about how the statue cost £30,000, use of the word celebrate the famous explorer, and the fact that the local MP says a lasting memorial to one of our local heroes. Now, some things to spot from the provenance. It's on the BBC Devon website. And we know that the Devon village, which the statue has been unveiled, was where Walter Raleigh was born. So therefore, the purpose is very much about celebrating Walter Raleigh, but also the audience is very much a local audience that might be celebrating somebody that was born in Devon in this particular village. And therefore, the audience is quite narrow, and they may be writing for people that might be maybe a little bit more positive about Walter Raleigh because he comes from that particular area. So there are going to be some key points to really hone in on. Now, when you come to read interpretation C, because this question is always about how far do interpretations differ, they're always going to give you 2 interpretations that are different. So before we've even read interpretation C, we can expect this one to be far more negative about the Elizabethan explorers, and that's going to be, or the adventurers, and that's going to be the key difference to have a look at. So if we look at interpretation C, it's an extract from an article in the online newspaper International Business Times in July 2015. Let's read it. "We have an unhealthy habit for nostalgia in Britain. Rosy-eyed remembrance of British history, the empire, blitz spirit, and all the rest in between. This week, David Cameron, the Prime Minister, said, 'I think of the age of discovery when our great explorers took to the waves. We need to employ some of that Elizabethan endeavour today. But the old English explorers of the Elizabethan era, such as Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Francis Drake, went around the globe pillaging far-flung, newly discovered lands and colonising every tribe, town and civilization they came across. Raleigh's trip to colonise what he called Virginia in the Americas ended with violence against natives. He brought back potatoes and tobacco. Thanks, Walt. And worse than Raleigh was Drake, a glorified pirate who loved nothing more than the seafaring life of robbery and violence.' So it's a very different impression, this one. And the overall impression is the Elizabethan adventurers were violent criminals who should not be glorified. So that's going to be obviously your starting point for how far they differ. When you're looking at the provenance here, you might think about how it's a much broader audience. It's an online newspaper, the International Business Times, in July 2015. So some key quotes that we might pick out from interpretation C might be the use of the word great explorers from David Cameron, the Elizabethan endeavour today. So that shows a little bit of similarities between some of the ideas in interpretation C and B, a recognition that other people think the Elizabethan explorers would deserve to be celebrated, but overall interpretation C's actual viewpoint is very negative. So use of the words things like pillaging, the use of the word colonizing, for example, the use of the phrase violence against natives, the sort of ironic use of thanks Walt, and then calling Francis Drake a glorified pirate who lived nothing more than a seafaring life of robbery and violence. They're going to be some key quotes to kind of pick out. So it's actually a really good tip in your answer to actually do that when you actually read the interpretations, to highlight some key quotes. Let's have a look at how to actually answer the question, how to structure the question. So you're going to want to have 2 paragraphs for this question. In the first paragraph, you're going to explain how far the interpretations differ. And you're going to focus on the overall impression that you get from each of the interpretations. Now, it is how far do they differ. So you are going to focus a lot on the differences, because there are quite a lot of differences. But again, if you can identify some similarities as well, that's absolutely fine. You need to support your ideas with quotes from the interpretation, so that's why we're getting you to highlight when you read the interpretations. Paragraph 2, you then need to explain why the interpretations differ. So you very much need to focus on provenance, and in particular write about the purpose of each interpretation, but also the audience that they're writing for as well. So there are a couple of key words you really want to be using in your answer. And there's a little word bank there just to kind of help you to think about good phrases to use. You know, things like interpretation B suggests, whereas interpretation C may conclude that. So we'll have a look at that when we have a look at the example answer in just a moment. So looking at an example answer for question for paragraph 1, again, is how far the interpretations differ. So this is the kind of answer that you would want to do. So the overall impression is very different. B is a very positive portrayal of Walter Raleigh, suggesting he is a hero and glorifying his contribution, with a local MP describing him as a local hero. The fact an expensive statue costing $30,000 had been made reinforces a positive portrayal, since statues are made to celebrate somebody's achievement. On the other hand, C portrays the adventures very negatively, using words such as pirates and pillagers, which have negative connotations. It even uses sarcasm about their achievements, like when it says "thanks, Walt," when writing about Raleigh's discovery of tobacco. B uses the word explorer, whereas C uses the word colonizer, which underline the different perspectives of each interpretation. Although both B and C acknowledge Raleigh's role in bringing back tobacco and recognise the fame of the explorers, the 2 interpretations are very different in their portrayal of the Elizabethan explorers. So some things to pick out there. Really good close comparison of the 2 interpretations. So when it says things like explorer compared to the use of the word colonizer, using phrases like on the other hand to show the differences between the 2 interpretations, and using lots of quotes, but also at the end talking about an overall kind of conclusion as to how far they differ. And in this answer it says they 2 are very different in their portrayal of Elizabethan explorers. Okay then, so in your second paragraph, you want to explain why the interpretations differ. Really here, you need to focus on provenance and in particular write about purpose and audience. So let's have a look at an example answer for this one. The reason why the interpretations differ is because of their purpose. B was made to commemorate Raleigh's contribution and made for a local audience, the BBC Devon website, who are proud that a famous historical figure was born in a Devon village. This means it will be unlikely to portray Raleigh negatively. On the other hand, the purpose of C is persuade readers that British people are too rosy-eyed and nostalgic about famous figures from history, and focuses on the negative aspects of the Elizabethan adventurers. Their purpose is to change people's minds, and as the audience is more of a national or indeed international one, it is made to raise awareness of what they regard as the true nature of some of the Elizabethan adventurers. Therefore, they differ due to the different purpose of the writers and the different audiences they are writing for. So I really put in bold there, where we talk about purpose and audience, to really emphasize that that's the key aspect of explaining why interpretations differ. So there you have it. There's a guide to Elizabethans question number 7. Thanks very much for listening. Goodbye.